Hello, everybody. My name is Lucas. In November 2020, my brother Mateo contracted COVID-19 like so many of us did. But unlike most of us, he hasn't yet recovered. Mateo is now what is known as a COVID long hauler, a title given to those whose COVID symptoms last more than 3 months. So, yeah. In all this time, he's been documenting his ups, downs, victories, and setbacks through journals, medical records, and love letters to you, the listener. And if he's come to one conclusion, it is that COVID is stupid. We started this project with the recognition that we were at 1,000 days. 1,000 days of COVID, of sickness, of mystery with no resolution. And now here we are, on our 2,000th day of COVID, of sickness, and of mystery with still no resolution. If that's how you're feeling, well, the bittersweet reality is that you're not alone in this. So if you have trouble putting it into context, maybe you could learn something from today's episode. Or maybe you have something you could teach others. Let's see, shall we? Here's my big brother Mateo with 2,000th day.
Hello, all you amazing long-hauling warriors. Today, I'm once again pausing to reflect. I say pausing to reflect, but I suppose I could alternately say, today I am holding my breath, hoping for the best, and cautiously approaching a sleeping monster in the forest. Why, you may ask? Because this week will mark my 2,000th day as a long hauler. Actually, by the time you hear this, it will be 2,000 and something, but we don't need to worry about those details right now. The first episode of this program was me reading a piece I wrote to commemorate my 1,000th day. And now look at me. 2,000 days. 2,000 days. Ugh. And I know that can be a big number to wrap one's mind around, so to help break that down into more relatable terms, that's like making it to 1,000 days and then doing it again. You're welcome. That original story about my first 1,000 days was an important turning point for me. That was when I made the choice to start writing all these silly, optimistic stories about my time as a long hauler. A dear friend had told me that it wasn't my illness that made it a story worth sharing. It was my response to the illness, my outlook in spite of the illness, my off-brand of humor, my optimism, my positivity, even whilst my body and brain were actively conspiring against me. That made the story worth writing about. So I did. I wrote and posted them in the various long hauler subs on Reddit. Fast forward 2 years and 24 stories. Now my lungs are finally strong enough to read these silly optimistic monologues out loud. So I did. I read. And became this program. In the 1,000 days from then until now, I've written about symptoms, doctors, nausea, therapies, therapists, other doctors, and other nausea. Oh, and Pokemon. I've told you about my challenges, my victories, my therapies, my therapists, and made jokes about all of the above. And for the most part, they were all tidy, self-contained stories with beginnings, middles, ends, morals, lessons, observations, and occasional countdown lists. Well, that is not what we're going to do today. On this 2000th today, I'd like to devote some time to talking about the things I don't know, haven't processed, haven't made peace with, and topics with which I yet wrestle. Things like self-identity, both now and when I come out the other end of long COVID. What's that going to look like? Fuck if I know. Or separating self-worth from productivity. And this isn't the same as separating self-worth from one's occupation. That's important, and that's something a lot of long haulers find themselves having to confront along their path. But today I'm using productivity in a far more general sense. Also on the list, how to turn down or turn off my impulse to benefit others, and instead allow myself to be the messy, needy, shaky shadow of a man that I sometimes need to be. And if you think that all sounds hilarious, then you are a sick fuck. And I'm glad that you're here. Mwah. All right, let's do this. More than a handful of times, I've talked about consciously doing things that help me feel like I matter. When I'm contributing, performing, vomiting for science, making art, folding laundry, helping out, or making sense of things that make no sense. Any of that. What I've given significantly less airtime to is the flip side. Can Mateo the long hauler still hold value on the days I can't produce anything? No chores, no clinical trial, no art, no podcast, no Pokemon, no moral at the end of the story. And it's not even that so much. Can I still hold value? Yes, of course I can. We all can, and I believe that to my core. A better question might be, why does my brain instinctively try to extract meaning from the suffering? Why is my default setting one that insists on turning lived experience into mineable material? Turn hardships into the next story, the next episode, the next punchline. How do I relate to myself when the "I'm valuable when I'm useful" mentality collides with a body and brain that can't keep up? One of my favorite spectator sports is watching people nerd out on the thing that they are nerdy about. I tell you this because I brought these questions up with my therapist at our last session, and I'm paraphrasing, but not by much, when I tell you that her response was something to the effect of, "Mateo, this is some good shit." So I'm eager for our next appointment when I get to hear what she has to say on the subject. Next on the list, what happens when the helper, the healer, the haver, the giver, whatever, what happens when someone in that role just needs a hot fucking minute? When they need to hit pause and step away? When they need to keep every available spoon they have for themselves. This doesn't happen often, but it does happen. Sometimes I don't feel like performing.
Mateo? Yeah, sorry to interrupt. You know I love you, but I have to call bullshit on that one.
Oh, okay. Harsh, but fair. How about sometimes I don't have the spoons to spend on performing? Better?
Yeah. I think. Yeah, that'll work.
That was weird. Did you know he was listening? Anyway, before COVID, my identity was almost entirely constructed around roles that all seemed to share a central tenet: perform, help, educate, produce, entertain, guide others. If I do that, then I get to be Mateo. Long COVID yanked away most of my platforms, stages, and audiences and left me alone in the dark. And that's not just me being poetic. I really do spend a lot of time alone in my room with the lights off. And yet, this old Mateo rule remained embedded in my psyche. I perform and I give, therefore I am. I've always been very open about ways I care for others. I'm less explicit about the cost, the wear and tear of always being on, being the one who holds hope, who carries the water. It's not even a question of what happens when the helper runs out of spoons. It's closer to, how can I allow myself the freedom to be out of spoons without feeling like I've somehow failed in my role as Mateo? Do I still get to be Mateo if I stop giving? I mean, yes, I know that's allowed, but how do I convince my nervous system of the same? How do I teach myself to befriend non-doing and not giving in a life that has already been stripped of so much? Often it involves cherishing and celebrating those little victories along the way, but on some days that is a wholly unsatisfactory answer. Furthermore, what happens to us between the big pushes? And can those in-between times still be an important part of a meaningful life? Again, my brain tells me the answer is yes, of course. So now the heavy lift is to make my nervous system a believer. Okay, this one has been sitting in my front pocket for most of these past 2,000 days. Post-COVID self-identity. I don't have the energy to be who I was yesterday. So where does that leave me today? And what does it mean for tomorrow? Who am I when the original script and default settings are all erased? Does my old sense of self still apply when there's no stage, no audience, and no applause? If Mateo fell in the forest, but there was nobody there to cheer, would he still monologue the whole affair in agonizing third-person detail? Okay, that one we probably all know the answer to. He absolutely would. Something very interesting happened recently. I felt lonely. And it didn't make sense to me because I don't really get lonely. I've always been incredibly adept at amusing myself, and that has come in very handy since 2020. And yet, I felt this absence, a hole where something should be. In therapy, I called it lonely because I couldn't think of any word more appropriate. And it took a while, but I eventually came to understand I wasn't missing people. I was missing art. I was missing the creative creation process. When I'm not producing or performing for anyone, the quiet that rushes in isn't loneliness, it's that old Mateo rule panicking. If there's no audience and no output, is there still a Mateo in here? Sometimes I catch myself shifting in a heartbeat from Mateo who is feeling something into Mateo who is turning that something into an episode. And I think that's another way my body is trying to say, I'm safest and most okay when I'm useful, making, helping, performing. My brain learned long ago that staying in motion, creating, caretaking, being the one with the joke, the advice, the monologue, the moral at the end of the story, those are all things that keep the what is my worth in this narrow, long COVID lifestyle alarm bells from ringing. So naturally, my brain tries to apply all my default settings into story and service. But when there's no project and no audience, suddenly that system has nothing to feed on. And whatever it was that I'd labeled loneliness gets conscripted by my director brain and instantly turned into something useful for others. A potential episode, a punchline, a lesson, whatever. Instead of just being a really sick guy with really healthy hair who doesn't have an answer. Life rarely presents itself in the form of a true-false multiple-choice Scantron question. And likewise, the answers aren't always able to be bite-sized sound bites of sound. But really, sometimes the answer is less important than the search for the answer, the personal journey to get there, the experiences we have along the way. So today, on this 2000th day of long hauling, I'm going to treat this list of unresolved questions as exactly what it is: the raw materials of a new identity still in development. These aren't things I'm failing at or questions with no answers, so much as they are very important and personal research questions in the ongoing experiment called Mateo's Search for Meaning. But even if they weren't, even if there was no takeaway and no moral at the end of the story, even if, that would be okay too. I love you all. I see you all. I would hug you all if I could. Strength and health. COVID is stupid.
No takeaway. No moral at the end of the story. No singular lesson in the end. How would that feel to you, the listener? Perhaps the better question is, would you accept that? Or would you feel that there's a meaning in there somewhere and it's up to you to find it? Whatever it is, however you choose to embrace it, we'd love to hear your take on it, as I'm sure so many others would. Email us at covidisstupid2020@gmail.com, and that's stupid with 2 O's, not a U. Follow us online on Facebook and Instagram at covidisstupid, or look for us anywhere that podcasts are available. Just look for COVID is Stupid. And that's right, 2 O's, not a U. So maybe the point is to cherish what you have. Maybe it's to divert your available spoons to more meaningful things. Or maybe the point of all this is simply that COVID is stupid.